Hello everyone, and thank you for joining the final week of the Signal Center's Accessibility Awareness Series. Signal Centers is located in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a gig city on the Tennessee River, and ranked as one of 2019's top 100 places to live in America. Signal Centers provides technology, accommodations, and training to help individuals with disabilities live their best lives. Here is CEO Donna McConico.
Hi, I'm Donna McConico. Welcome to the Signal Center's Accessibility Awareness Summit. Last year, at our very first summit, our keynote speaker, Haben Girma, said this: "The problem is never the disability." She was right. We are living in the midst of a technology renaissance, and we must be the leaders insisting that this movement is for all. Accessibility is within our reach, and it will take persistence and creativity to fully embrace all of the possibilities that technology offers for individuals with disabilities. Thank you for joining us again this year to continue the conversation about accessibility.
This webinar series would not be possible without the support of our partner and host, Chattanooga State Community College. With an enrollment of more than 8,000 students, Chattanooga State offers more than 100 degree plans. Its digital accessibility mission statement is a commitment to provide all individuals the opportunity to use technologies. Here is Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Beth Norton.
Chattanooga State hopes this conference series will inspire transformative conversations about the inclusion of all individuals in the ever-changing world of digital technology.
Signal Centers is grateful to the following sponsors: McKee Bakery, Unum, Phil Hour, Electric Power Board, Tennessee Council on Developmental Disabilities, AT&T, and a special thank you to Blue Cross Blue Shield Tennessee for sponsoring today's sessions.
You know, when I think of Blue Care, the phrase that always comes to mind is, "We make a difference." It's really become a mission and a passion for this division to figure out ways to promote healthcare. We really want to make the lives of our members better. We promote a population health management model, meaning we integrate and coordinate a member's total physical, behavioral, and long-term care support and services needs. We're also looking to expand our program for our intellectually and developmentally disabled population. I'm really proud that we've been in this program for 22 years and now serve as an industry leader. I'm proud that we have been a good and trusted partner to the state of Tennessee. I'm proud that we've improved the health care in the state of Tennessee for so many members, but probably the thing that I am most proud of are each and every one of our 1,200 employees that work within Chattanooga, in our regional offices, in our communities. I see them approach their work every day with a passion, an energy, a drive, because they know they can make a difference. And I think that's how we support the mission of peace of mind through better health.
And now, in recognition of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, a Universal Design Roundtable with Dr. Leslie Jensen-Inman, co-CEO of Center, a new design school in Chattanooga, Tennessee, to develop the next generation of industry-ready user experience designers, and Daniel Ryan, head of technology at Ragtag, a company that organizes tech volunteers for civic engagement.
Thank you, Alex. Really excited to be here. My name is Summer Kohlhorst, and today I'm going to be leading this panel on accessible or universal web design. I'm really excited to lead this topic because accessible and universal web design stretches further than just creating accessible code. It's really a mindset on how we can intentionally design a more accessible and inclusive place for everyone, inside and outside of digital spaces. We already covered our two amazing panelists for today, Dr. Leslie Jensen-Inman and Daniel Ryan. And so since we know them and Alex has given us the go-ahead to get started, let's just dive into these great questions. So the first thing I'd like to ask is, what are the ways your team's process meets accessible and inclusivity needs? Leslie or Dan?
Great. Our team at Center UIE really looks at every opportunity we can to really think about our users' needs. Right. That's what's important. To meet people where they are, to give them the support that they need to have the best experiences that they can. This, of course, is ever changing, and meeting people's needs are changing. For example, when everything started moving to an online space, we've found ourselves really needing to understand how we could support our users' needs in live video chats, like things that we're doing just like right here, and finding ourselves diving deep into live captioning and things that we just hadn't had to do before because we weren't having live videos in the same way. But now we're building a very big community of user experience designers, and we want to make sure it's accessible for everyone and also inclusive as well. So we're always adapting, and what we do is we really just very much listen to what our users needs, and people will tell us what they need, and we will do our best to make it their experiences the best possible, right? And making sure that we're delivering excellence at every opportunity.
Awesome. Just a quick thing up front. I'm no longer with Ragtag, but that happened between the video getting made, so couldn't really edit the video after the fact. But yeah, everything Leslie said, I think one of the things that has been so meaningful to me to think about in terms of accessibility, inclusivity over the years, everyone's going to need it at some point. And the last 3 months have really proven that, right? Like, we all needed accessibility in a way that most of us had not worried about previously. Watching so many events move to online only, and what does that mean, and what does that impact, and how does that change the shape of how we interact? Even day-to-day work, if you're one of the, I think it's 20-something% of folks who were able to work from home during the pandemic, what did that look like? And childcare at home in the middle of work, and like everything's just changed, right? We all have to adapt. One of the things too that I wanted to highlight, some of you asked about process, and I think it's such a big thing to just start as the foundation of the talk today, is like, if accessibility isn't the foundation of your process, you're doing it wrong. Like, we talked about this a lot last year, and we'll reiterate it this year because it's still true. Like, if your whole process is thinking about how we include everyone and bring everyone into the experience, and how we make it both accessible from the sort of legal standpoint and from a broader sense of how we make this reachable for everyone, you take so much of the cost of doing it out because it's just the process. It's just how we think. It's just how we do. It's not an expense. It's not a liability when we don't do it. Like, we just do it this way. One of the simple tricks for that I've been doing for the last several years is we don't give clients an option that is not accessible. We weed out all the accessibility issues internally when we're doing design work, we're doing logo work, color palettes, web work, any of that. Like, it's not even something they have to worry about because it's just never going to be a choice to be accessible or not. And I think that approach of like, this isn't a choice we make, it's just a tenet of who we are, is a super useful way to think about accessibility and inclusivity.
To build on what Dan just said, it's how we approach it too, right? We talk about accessibility being baked in. It's not a choice, right? It's what we do. And it's our responsibility to serve as many people in the way that they need to be served as possible. And so on our school side of things, with Center, we make sure that accessibility isn't just a single course or like a project assignment. It is in every single aspect, in every single course that we do. And we've even gone back and really thought about how do you make this probably seems pretty obvious now with all this stuff with the last 3 months, but this was before that. We realized we need to have people think about, how do you make every meeting accessible? How do you facilitate critique in an accessible way, in an inclusive way? And those challenges have not really been thought of in a hugely deep way within our field before, at least not in ways that there's not very much information you can find about it. So we've been really thinking about it and doing our research and talking with people to find ways to make sure that we are teaching the next generation of user experience designers how to think about others at every single step of the process. And it's not just the product you build. It's not just an app. It's not just a website. It's working with your team to get to those things. It's making sure that you have a diverse team in the first place who have different needs and who have people in their lives that have different needs, so that they can have the empathy and have the experience to be driven to build the proper experiences for all people.
Those are both great insights, because I think a lot of times people will have accessibility as an afterthought. They'll build something and then they say, well, then how can I make it accessible? But from what you two are saying, it's don't think like that. Think of it as in the process. They said bake it in, and then you won't get that awkward, oh no, we've built all this stuff and now we have to go back and make sure it works for everyone's needs problem. But from the beginning, you're thinking that way.
I was reading some research, and I'll see if I can get this on our notes for later, that address like the financial cost, right? And like this whole, like, do you just bake it in the process or not? And the end of a bunch of research that they had done was, if you are just doing accessibility all throughout your process, the nominal cost is about $100 to address any given issue. If it comes in as a complaint from a customer, it's $1,000 to fix it, because now you got to get everybody involved and make sure it got fixed correctly. And if it's a legal complaint, it's $100,000. That's per instance. So like, just do it up front. It's just the right thing to do. It's the smarter thing to do. It's the better business decision all the way around. Just have it as part of the process. Bake it in. That's exactly it.
That's great. Well, to kind of build off of that, I mean, that's a benefit you just said, but can you tell us about maybe another time when you saw a direct benefit from something being designed to meet accessibility and inclusivity needs?
Let's see, I can go, you can go. Sure.
Dan, you can go first.
Yeah, sure. I'm trying to think of a really good one, but I'll talk about some of the work we've been doing during the pandemic here in Chattanooga around digital divide issues. And so there's a program here called Tech Goes Home that is part of the Enterprise Center, which I sit on the board of. So full disclosure, I'm cheerleading for the group today. But the Tech Goes Home initiative is all about getting devices into students' hands who could not afford them otherwise. We've been working on this for 5 years, put thousands and thousands of devices out into the community. And then all of a sudden, everyone had to have one, right? Because now we're all doing school from home. And this isn't a luxury, this is a need. So having those kind of programs in place already that we could then expand upon, because we were already thinking about how to be more inclusive and more equitable in our community, meant that we had the program in place and we had the know how to do it. Now all we needed was the funding, and magically the funding showed up when there was a big problem for everyone. So the kind of work that we've been doing, I think Jeff Mellner is probably on the call. I might be able to throw in some of the stats, but I think this morning I just saw it at 8,000 families that have been connected to Wi-Fi that didn't have it previously through this. Tons of devices have gone out. Wi-Fi hotspots all over the city that you can pull up and use if you don't have Wi-Fi at home. Lots of community efforts to have churches and various like community facilities just open up their Wi-Fi to people in the neighborhood, so you can come sit on the sidewalk out front and do your homework if you don't have access at home. And so having those kind of programs, even when they're not a priority for everyone, that you can expand upon when you need to, is a super useful thing. And I think thinking through, like, we talk about accessibility in web design so much as like a markup issue and a screen reader issue. And it's so much deeper. Like, you have to be able to connect to the internet. Like, that's step 0. And people don't think of that as being an issue because we all carry a computer in our pocket or on our wrist that's better than the Apollo program, but that's not true for everyone. It's just not. And in Chattanooga alone, we have tens of thousands of folks who cannot afford to have real adequate internet service at their home, and they're at a disadvantage in the work marketplace. Their families are at a disadvantage in the education space. Like, these are all things we have to do. And we know that when we do, we lift these people up and help them get connected. It just pays off and pays off and pays off. I think that's, you want a big payoff. Look at what is the community is going to look like in 10 years when we've connected everyone. They can get educated and get better jobs.
And I think, Dan, you point out something really important, that accessibility isn't like, some people think that accessibility, to think about, right, hearing impaired or vision lost or a physical something, right? But it's accessibility has so many different facets. So being able to connect to the internet, being able to have the technology to do the things that you need to do to improve your life and to improve your families, that's huge. And the work that's been happening with Tech Goes Home has just been incredible, and being able to spin it out even broader, like, it's one of the things that we do so well in Chattanooga. We realize that there are things like a digital divide, and we figure out how to build those private and public partnerships to lessen it, right? To make things a little bit better. And that's one of the reasons that I think it's so wonderful to be here in Chattanooga and to be surrounded by people who are thinking about others, right? Like, we're not just thinking about ourselves. What serves me? How can I serve you? How can I help you achieve what you need to do? The greatness that you are here on this earth to do, how can I help with that? And so I think it's a great thing to remind ourselves that accessibility isn't just this little teeny sliver. There's all these different parts. One of the parts that I worked on a lot last year was the Velocity 2040 project with the Chamber of Commerce, and accessibility in a different way. We wanted to make sure it was accessible to as many people in Hamilton County as possible. And so that meant not just making sure that we got things right for screen readers or for English speaking people, but also for people whose main language or who's more comfortable with speaking Spanish. And that's another way of including, the people in our community and making sure their voices are heard. That program really, there was a survey and making sure that everybody's voice that wanted to be heard could be heard and collected, and ideas about our future and what things should look like in 2040. So that was a really amazing project for that reason, because we were able to reach out to so many different people. And we also did make sure things were meeting the needs of all kinds of people with the technology too. Originally, the survey had been created in a way that if you needed a screen reader, it would have been awful. It was not a good experience, even if you didn't need a screen reader. If you were on your mobile phone, it would have been really, really, really terrible. And not everybody has a computer. Mobile phones are a way that people are connected. And we need to consider how we're delivering our information so that we can make sure everybody has an opportunity to receive it. And if we're asking for input, making sure that we're not just getting input from a certain group of people, right? Like, especially with this kind of project where it was a community project and we were trying to reach as many people in the community as possible. I mean, that was the goal. So we really had to think that through. And so I just think it's really important for us to think about accessibility and inclusivity in so many different ways and on so many different levels.
I think adding on to that too, it's what you were just saying, but I want to call it out and put a big pin on it. Like, not having one medium for your message. Like, it can't just be visual. It can't just be web. It can't just be voice. It can't just be SMS. Like, you need to blend these things and mix them, because everyone's going to have different ways they access this information and ways to give feedback. So make sure you're not in a silo. And I know that involves costs and money, and that's always hard to do. But if that's the case, then go with the biggest collection of the least expensive methods, right? Like maybe it doesn't need to be a big flashy campaign. Maybe it can be something that goes out over text message and posters,
And what was
whatever
really,
it takes.
Yeah, what was really important with that project was to reach different neighborhoods. There was actually printed surveys and that were hand delivered to people, and their responses brought in and taken in because, again, not everyone has access to technology, not everyone feels comfortable with it, and you got to meet people where they are and their needs. And it's not about me; it's about other people.
So what I'm hearing as a main theme there is that accessibility can really be looked at to close the gap in the digital divides in our communities. Which I think is, again, it's not when you first think of accessibility, that's not one of the first things that come to your mind. But when you start to look at it in all the different ways that you mentioned, Leslie, that your students worked on that project, and Dan, you mentioned the different media types you have to look at, that's what it does, which is really great.
I think that's why the term universal design is super interesting, right? Like, you can take that phrasing so many ways, and the one I love is you're designing for the universe. Like, everything should be a client. Everyone should be a client. Like, you just have to think about all these multiple ways, and then bring it back onto like the more accessibility A11Y thing. In the last year or so, the best practices for that, the WAGA, is that getting that right? The guidelines for accessibility have put out a new version, and it's all about mobile access. Like, that's all the new things are. Make sure that it works in portrait and landscape. So if someone's got a device that's physically attached to a chair, that they don't have to rotate it to use your screen. Making sure that you don't have to go back and forth while you're reading, right? Like, that it all fits on a screen and you can scroll the way that everyone scrolls. That screen readers can work. That's an obvious one that's sort of a no-brainer, but on mobile devices, a lot of apps were not written that way, particularly on the Android platform. So thinking about, like, it's not just this one thing you have in mind. And the thing I'm always harping on my design friends about is, you sit at these computers with massive CPU power and a 30-inch monitor, and it's an 8K display and all this, and like, most people are doing it on like this little corner of your screen. That's the size they're doing it on. So design for that first, and then maybe we'll add on some stuff for the big screens, but most of your people aren't on those.
That's a good thing to call out. Yeah, I think one thing designers, like, I came from a graphic design background, and a big thing is, well, you first make pretty gray type on a gray background, and then you realize, oh no, people can't see that.
Nope.
You can't design in a way that might look the best. You have to design it for readability. You have to design it so that people can actually understand what you're trying to do. Maybe, Leslie, you can talk about that when it came to how do you teach some of those principles for some of your design students, for the UX design students?
Sure. So within the Center program, it's a 2-year program. And so there's a lot of courses, 24 core courses. As I mentioned, one course we teach is facilitation. So it's facilitating and critique. I know there's been questions about that. So I'll address those first, Summer. And so with making something accessible in-person meeting, we were thinking about this before we were using all the online tools for every meeting. So we were talking about how do you make a meeting or facilitate a critique, and maybe the critiques about a design. How do you do that in a way that meets the needs of everyone's in the room, and and we were specifically as a group talking about how do you do that when it's not an obvious physical disability. Because obvious physical disabilities, there's more, been a lot more solutions for that. Like, and people understand it better and they can see it. So they're like, oh, I need to consider this, and they're more aware. But how do you design for an experience with other humans when you don't know if somebody is struggling with something? One of the things we're looking at is, what if somebody has they have attention deficit disorder, or they are not able to focus, or you don't know that they can't really learn in the way that you think. They're not being able to follow just with words. So there's simple things that you can do. And again, this is for someone that is sighted. You can, use the whiteboard and write out the notes, and someone take notes. You can use, if you're in an online space, or even if you were in person, you could have a shared notes document and have people put in notes. And so other people can follow along. Or if they miss something because you're moving at a speed that they can't quite keep up with for whatever reason, they're able to review that after the meeting. It just gives people and this kind of goes back to what Dan was saying, the more ways you can reach people and the more mediums you can deliver your message in, the better chance that more people are going to receive the message. So it's about making your experience very varied. And so hopefully that answers some of the questions I know people have about designing for meeting experiences or facilitation for critique. Now, Summer, back to your question about actual design elements. That's really interesting too, right? Some of the things that I've done with students in the past are have them experience what it's like to not be sighted and have to listen to a screen reader, right? And be like, so the way you mark this up, your code for this, listen to this. Does this sound like a good experience? Could you understand that, what you needed to understand to do the next thing? That's one of the ways that they can temporarily have some insight into things. The other thing we really, really, really focus on is user research. So having students actually do usability test, and you'll notice I don't say user testing, because we are not about testing users. We are about testing the usability. So as something, testing the usability of a website or an application, and making sure that the users that you bring into that testing have all different kinds of needs, so that you are covering as many as possible, and that you're getting the best input to make your product be able to serve people in the best ways. So that's something, the user research for us is really, really key. And of course, any times that you can build that connection with other humans, I believe it strengthens empathy and the desire for a designer or for anyone to build something that meets the needs of all people.
I'll throw in there from the engineering side. One of the things that's happened in the last 5-10 years that's been really great is being able to automate accessibility testing and usability testing. I believe it was Chrome last week. It might have been Firefox. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but one of the big browsers just shipped in their developer tools last week a way to look at your website in every variation of color blindness, and even some work on fuzzy vision. So if you have nearsighted and you can't see a screen real well, to just let people, to your point, Leslie, being empathetic, actually experience what that site is like when you have a different vision than the designer or the engineer does. And one of the processes that I've put in place on my work in the last several years is we have to have a 100% accessibility score. It's an automated testing. It happens every time you make a change. That test gets run. If it's less than 100, you got to go fix it. And making that part of the process just makes it a no-brainer, right? Like, oh, we're not going to make things that are inaccessible because I have to build and have to go fix them before I can ship them anyway. So like, let's just do it from the front. So like, finding those kind of tools, finding those kind of experiences, super wonderful, but nothing really beats sitting in a room with human beings and watching them use your product and see how it goes. I think one of the stories I told last year, I'll tell again this year for folks who weren't around, is when I worked at the Obama campaign, some of my favorite work was the work we did with, we'd get volunteers and just ask them a question about, what's the president's policy on X, and then give them our website, and could they figure out how to find out that information? And we learned so much about our assumptions about how people use the website by just watching everyday people go use our website with a simple question. We thought, like, for us, it was 3 clicks away. For them, it might have been 20 minutes, and they would just get frustrated and quit. Having those kind of experiences where like our engineers could sit with real people is just invaluable.
That's great. It's really putting yourself in your user's shoes and trying to think beyond just the people that you might think of, or the people that you, like you mentioned, might have a seen disability. And when people also say, oh, but it's too hard, my organization's unique, we've got this. I mean, Dan, working for a government agency, I mean, government web properties are notorious for being behind design-wise and for so much red tape. And you mentioned a little bit about, just at least having a couple things to make sure that you're testing, but is there anything more that you can give examples to show that if you can get through that, anybody can?
Yeah, I think it's just, it's about selling the story of the benefit and the cost, both from it's a little different on the government side, which I haven't worked in much. Politics and government are not the same thing, and where there's a whole thing. But on the political side, right, like it's sales, it's marketing. You're trying to get people to join your email list, to donate money, to donate time. It's all the same normal stuff. If you're cutting out a huge swath of your market, you're just, tying your arm to your side and then trying to ski down a mountain. Like, what are you doing? Like, one of the things that you have to think about is, like, I think it's over 2 billion people now on the planet have some sort of vision impairment. So it's a third of the planet needs you to think about vision accessibility. Like, if you're just saying, no, we don't care, our organization's unique, like, we can't worry about that, you just cut out a third of your market. Like, who can afford to cut out a third of your potential market? You can't. And then you add in things like, Leslie, our friend Eric Meyer, his story about accessibility can also be time limited. Like, if your kid is hurt and you're trying to get help on 911 and no one's understanding you, and the ER is a nightmare because no one's just helping your kid, you're not in a place to deal with forms and deal with bureaucracy. So, like, there's a whole layer of accessibility that's temporal, that it might be for a few weeks, it might be for a few minutes, it might be for a lifetime. So just trying to make all these things and think through these use cases, and particularly, if you're in an industry where people are going to be coming at you in pain and in peril, like, that's got to be part of the design process, is that this has to work when I cannot think about how this works.
Yeah, making sure that the right information gets to that person in the right way in that time of need. They might be emotionally disabled at that moment in a way where they, they're trying to read their phone for instructions or directions to a hospital or what have you, with tears in their eyes. Like, how do you do that? And that person might not be considered disabled all the time, but in that moment, they need a different level of help. And so we really have to think about the way that we're serving information to people so that ultimately we can meet their needs.
That's great. And that really goes to the universal aspect of this. We talked about universal web design. I think for a lot of designers, we will sometimes make these beautiful, we call personas of, this is the type of person who uses my site. And it'll go down to all of these minute and sometimes like not needed details about someone. If you think about who, what is their gender and what is their background, and think, well, that's not as important as what are they trying to accomplish? What is the scenario? And I think, Dan, that's what you talked about, where everyone's been in a case, no matter who you are, no matter what background you come from, no matter what you look like, where you're hurt or your child's hurt, you need to go to the hospital, you need to find a doctor, and you are scared, you are stressed. And that's a completely different scenario than you usually are in your everyday life. You are now faced with something different, and those needs that you have are now different than when you're not completely stressed out and you're not thinking about your health. And so that goes to another way of just universally thinking about people's needs versus putting people into boxes and things. So I think that's just interesting to me.
I think I saw this on your Twitter this week, Summer. It may not have been, but also if you want to find out tons of great stuff about user experience, follow Leslie and Summer on Twitter, because I learned like half of what I learned from following the two of them. But someone was suggesting that in addition to doing personas about customers, we also start doing them about us as the practitioners, so that everyone can see the blind spots in that decision chain. And when we're all talking about social inequity and racial justice and anti-racism right now, like that was really powerful. That like we should actually like put that in that UX toolbox. Like let's really like paint a portrait of who we are, what assumptions we're making about the world because of who we are, and make that part of that process too. And that was just a like light bulb moment for me. Like, yeah, of course we should talk about our own biases and who the people preparing the materials are coming from.
Yeah, I think it's really important for all of us to have the mindset of transparency, right? With accessibility, inclusivity, like transparency. So, Dan, what I hear you saying is like it's being transparent and honest about who I am, who you are, what our team looks like. And I don't mean physically, but although that could be part of it, but where are the gaps? Where are blind spots? Where are the biases? Addressing them, making sure that then, because that allows us the opportunity to check assumptions, to check biases, to bring in other people, to bring in the voices we need to hear, to do the usability testing we need to do the user research we need to do all of it. But if we're not honest and transparent with ourselves, then how do we do that? And I think one of the things that our mindset really has to be set on is being open to learning, right? So I'm the first to say I don't know it all, and I'm constantly learning, and every single day I learn something new. And my father always says, if you're not learning something new every day, you might as well be dead. Like he goes, what's the point? Like life is about learning. And it's a good thing for me. And I'm checking myself every day, right? I'm reflecting, what did the most important thing I learned today, and how may it change the way I approach things in the future? That question for me is so powerful because it makes me stop and reflect. And if we have a mindset of learning, we understand that, okay, maybe we didn't make the best decision, because I think there's a lot of shame that comes around with accessibility, inclusivity, because maybe our version of ourselves yesterday didn't know something that we know today, and the version of ourselves today can do something better than we did yesterday, or different, or more inclusive, more accessible, more universal, thinking about universal design principles. And I think we have to, in our way, give ourselves some grace if we are truly learning and truly wanting to do better. And hopefully other people can see, like, oh yeah, they messed up, but I think they're, I'm going to assume positive intent about them. I know that they want to do better. Maybe I will share this resource with them that they didn't know that they could test for this kind of thing, or that there's this kind of resource, or that this browser came out with this new tool to make things easier. And so I think if we all sort of are honest with ourselves, that we give grace with each other, we assume positive intent, and that we're always learning, then we're going to be in a good place and we get better. And nothing is perfect, but let's all strive to do a little bit better every day. And some days we can do a lot better. And those are really good days.
I wasn't sure how I was going to work maintenance into this talk today. That's been the thing I've been like on my hill about for the last year. I went to an amazing conference in DC in the fall called the Maintainers Conference. Totally recommend everyone check it out. And it's all about people who their job is maintaining society. And so this particular year was open source software librarians and road infrastructure folks, and putting all those folks together for a week and seeing what we'd come up with. And one of the things we talked about over and over again on all of those areas, it's just really hit me with software projects, is we don't spend any budget on maintenance. All the money is in launch. And to Leslie's point about like, I might learn something tomorrow that makes me a better designer for everyone, a better engineer for everyone. We need to have a process and budget in place to let us constantly fix what we've been working on. So that as we learn these lessons, there is space to go back and fix the old projects and not just make the new ones better. I think that's just a really powerful thing to be thinking about, and not a popular opinion that I give people because they want to spend their money on the big bang and the big press hit, right? But like, we have to be able to go back and make our work better because it's going to be around, if not forever, for quite a long time. So the longer it sits out there not being the best it could be, the more damage it's doing.
That's great. We have a couple more minutes before we go to questions. So Dan and Leslie, if there's any final maybe next steps, simple steps folks can take to be accessible and meet those needs, or what's one takeaway you'd like them to leave with, because you've given so many, anything you'd like to end with? Leslie, you want to go first?
Sure. I just want to put out there that accessibility and inclusivity doesn't need to be expensive. It just needs to be intentional. You just need to be thinking about it. Let's intentionally design things. You know, intentional design and universal design, when they come together, that's good stuff, right? That's when we do things that can change the world, because we're helping other people do what they need to do to move forward in whatever they're trying to do. And so I think that's extremely critical for all of us to do, is to be intentional, to start from the beginning, like Dan mentioned, and if this is not an option, this is the way it is. Let's just design with these things in mind from the very beginning, and then let's keep learning and let's do better every day.
I think for me, the future that I'm looking for in accessibility and inclusivity is adding equity into that, and that it's not just we're going and getting opinions from folks with different impairments or different abilities as part of a process, but like they own the process, like they're part of the stakeholders, and this just gets into big brain ideas, right? But like really having people have a seat at the table, and not just for 5 minutes, but that they're there throughout the entire process. And they're not just there because of their ability differences, that they're there because they offer a lot. They are a full person with a whole life experience they can bring to the conversation, and giving them space to do that, and not just like bringing folks in to talk about their vision impairment, for instance, but letting them talk about their whole lived life and how these products impact that, and bringing them in as engineers. A friend of mine's interviewing for a job right now and met a software engineer who is completely blind and has all of his code memorized. And I'm just blown away by what that has taken to be an engineer, and so excited that like they have a job that they've been at for 20 years and has given them space to be there and be part of the process, and be a voice, for inclusivity and equity. Just that makes me very happy that that's there, and we should do more of that.
That's great. Well, thank you, Leslie and Dan. Great things around being intentional, working with others who have different view sites and different points and when they were working, and closing the gap in digital divide. I think all those things help to make a really universal, inclusive, and accessible world. So Alex, I'm going to turn this over to you now.
Yeah, thank you, Summer. I appreciate it. Memorized his code?
Yeah.
What the heck?
Yeah, I can't remember the thing I wrote 2 minutes ago, much less what I've written in its entirety.
Yeah, that's
so impressive.
That's ridiculous. Thank you all so much for your presentation. I really love specifically something that sticks out to me is how both of you utilize empathy as a tool for within your own design teams. And because it's so easy to say, okay, I'm like this, I'm not farsighted, I don't have color blindness, I don't have this, that, and the other. And it's so natural a lot of times for human beings to say, okay, that other population is other to me. Therefore, there's no impact there. So closing that gap of otherness with things like empathy, with those exercises in empathy, I mean, that changes the game. And I really love what you all said about that. So folks, we're now actually going to turn it over to Q&A. You should see your Q&A panel over on the right side of your screen. I will just say that if you do have a question, if you will address that question to all panelists instead of just one of them specifically, just to make sure we all see it, and Dan and Leslie and maybe even Summer could address those questions as well. If you do need to utilize a video relay service, we do have a staff member standing by to field those calls. You can direct those calls to 423-298-2489. So we'll give a little bit for some questions to come in. One question that actually I had was, has there ever been instances where you're curating your design to make it accessible for one particular population that directly impacted the accessibility of a different population in a negative way? And how do you mitigate that tension? Or is there always a solution? And leave that to either to both of you. Dan, do you want to start with that?
Sure. I can't think of any example where I've seen that in particular. I think on the tech side, there's usually ways to handle multiple audiences at once. That takes some intentionality. So we deal with a thing called ARIA, roles and labels and attributes, and this whole like getting much better arsenal of tools that we can employ to tell screen readers what to do, and in different accessibility software, how to handle things differently. So it takes some research, takes some knowledge, and takes some thought to go in and make something that works both visually well and textually well and orally well and all of that. But it can be done, just a matter of sitting down and thinking about it. I guess I can give you an example of how a lot of us years ago tried to solve a screen reader issue and then actually made it worse, which is one of these little tricks of, you had text that you'd want to put on a web page that was only there for screen readers to describe a graphic, right? You don't want everyone else to see it, and so we hide it. And we're hiding that off screen in such a way that like it was getting repeated over and over again. So people who were using a screen reader were just getting repetitive text because it wasn't done correctly, and trying to solve for problems like that takes a lot of thought, and it takes a lot of people actually using the software, right, to like go in and listen to your website. A great tip I read doing some research for this was one of the things that web designers should be doing is unplugging your mouse and now try to use your website. Because if you can't use it with a keyboard, then the assistive devices certainly can't use it, because they're all based on keyboard gestures for the most part.
Right, and Leslie, do you have anything to add in that regard?
Yeah, I have an example, but it's not my own example. It's something I've experienced. So I get migraines, and I get ocular migraines, and like eye fatigue, of course, with the amount of time spent on a computer and looking at screens. And so for a long time, way back when the web was starting, like a lot of, and I think Summer mentioned this, like gray type on gray backgrounds, and it was like, and little teeny text. So people got smarter and thought, okay, we don't need to make it so much about the aesthetics. We can still make it look good, but make it more readable, make it more legible, serve more people. And so things became a lot of sites became like very white backgrounds, very light backgrounds, and very dark text. And that contrast actually can be very wearing for someone like me who has is light sensitive and gets headaches. And so, no, but eventually that problem has been addressed, and for a lot of people has been solved. Being able to color shift your computer, or being able to go into like night mode and making most of it black, and the making basically doing the opposite, and the text white. So I feel like most challenges can be overcome if there's enough enough need, and people start seeing the need, and people have the time and the resources, time being one of those resources, if they are allowed to design to meet the need. So it's a lot of times getting buy-in from whoever you need to get buy-in from, to put the energy into something, if you haven't designed it with those kind of considerations from the beginning, which many people didn't, because that just, things were way different. And we made a lot of interesting mistakes experimenting on the web at first when it comes to accessibility. But I think people are getting it and getting better, and things are moving forward. So that's just one example I can think of, Alex.
Sure. Yeah, and that brings up an interesting part where you have, okay, because of color contrast ratios for people with low vision, that particular design negatively impacted you with your very specific niche thing that you struggled with. So I guess that kind of then begs the question, is the way that you were able to find a solution to that was kind of something outside of the design of that site. That was kind of like either something built into the machine you were using, or maybe a third-party application. So what is the relationship there? What is the responsibility there between what can be handled, as you all said, baked into the site itself, versus when does it then transition to a collaborative effort between third-party app designs, or applications? Do you all have any thoughts about kind of what does that balance look like?
I see it as, a lot of times a third-party application will come in and meet a need, and sometimes it ends up being just a bridge until the applications themselves can figure out how to implement it internally.
Gotcha.
And so, and it's interesting because it goes back and forth. But I think that's what I've seen the most of. And I do think it's when there's an issue, if you know that there's a challenge to be solved, and you're making a new application or a new website, it's great to consider those things in mind so you don't have to retrofit. But there will always be something that we learn later on, and we're going to have to go back and, as Dan was talking about, have space to go back and address those things. And then sometimes we just know that like maybe there's like an industry standard, like this third party thing is so much better than anything we can do, so we're going to recommend to people that they use this, right? It's just it's building a relationship with trusted partners as well.
And just curious about kind of how the two of you personally choose to manage your teams when it comes to accessibility. So for those that don't know, there are accessibility guidelines. I believe it's WCAG guidelines, and there are usually 3 tiers. If I'm there's single A, double A, triple A. Is that
yeah?
Correct?
Single A, don't even bother. Like, that's not even on the table. So double and triple A are the ones anyone ever talks about. Double A is required by law in many cases, and triple A is sort of best of breed. And I always shoot for triple A personally.
Right.
There are a few cases where that's gets tougher to do, but
Sure. Yeah, that was kind of going to be my question. If you,
yeah.
what factors go into, um, you look at a project and say, okay, maybe AA is all we can realistically do here versus AAA. Actually, before we do that, from a web development standpoint, what does AA look like often executed well on a website? What are some things that you have to take into consideration for AA accessibility?
The biggest thing that I see that I run into, like that we have to go fix a lot, is color contrast. Most of the rest of AA, if a designer and or an engineer, because these terms get so interchanged in our industry, but if a person building the website has been taught well from a good program, they're just going to do most of the accessibility stuff because that's just baked into their brain. The color contrast is the one we struggle with a lot, particularly if you're coming into a legacy brand and that brand's colors just aren't accessible. What are we going to do? And then the one, so the big difference between AA and AAA is how much contrast there is on text that you're reading. That's the one I see all the time. And so figuring that out and working that out, and like sometimes we've gone to companies and been able to say like, hey, if we shifted your color palette like 2 degrees, you're never going to notice. Then it's AAA accessible. They're cool with it. If they're not AA accessible, then we've got to have some real talks. But that goes into that whole process thing. None of the logos that I presented to clients in the last 4 years have not already passed that check. Like, don't even give them an option of a color palette that is accessible. But that's the toughest one, is just getting the colors right. And so practically speaking, what that means is like text on a button. If the contrast is too low, people can't read what the call to action is, so they're probably not going to act on it. And so now you're losing revenue or you're losing conversions. Like, it's bad all the way down. It's not just like, I think people often think about accessibility as charity to people, and it's like, it's bad business to not follow this because you're excluding a marketplace. So if you got to answer Jeff's question of how do we get people on board with this, like, you're losing money if you don't. If that doesn't get you on board in a capitalist society, I don't know what will. So
yeah, and I actually just want to read out Jeff's question just so that our audience can see it. And then Leslie, if you'll take this last one. Jeff Milner asked, what is your advice for non-designers in engaging the design community around accessibility work?
Okay, let's see. So non-designers engaging accessibility work. I think part of it is going in with an open mind, right? Understanding where you are with your knowledge of and understanding where you're trying to get to, right? So I'm trying to, I'm like, I wish I could talk to Jeff and just be like, tell me more about
I think the background he's coming from here, because I worked on some projects, is when it matters to the organization to be accessible and not necessarily the designers you're talking to. How do you get the designers to like buy into your accessibility vision? Which is,
well, I guess I laugh because I'm like, I don't think I'd work with them. Like, you've got to get them right. If they just don't do it, like, there's just not an option. Yeah. If you don't do it, you're not going to be a part of the team that's making the deliverables I need made. If you're going to resist me on that, actually, you probably don't hold the same values that I do to be wanting to move this forward. Now, that is if somebody's just like blatantly, no, I'm not going to do this. I don't believe in it, right? But most people, once they start seeing why this is important, they get it. And so it's exposure, right? Exposing people to the concepts, bringing them along, education, right? Having them meet with people, having them watch users work on their application or their website, seeing how their designs are being used in real life. It is a very humbling experience. Like, you can think that you've got the best thing you've ever made, and you go and watch someone use it, and you're like, oh, they're really struggling on this. And I just thought it was so easy. But you've been using it, and you know exactly. I think Dan, you mentioned this. You know the exact 3 clicks to go on, and they're struggling for 20 minutes. That is how I think you get people who you know are good people who want to do well, who are not resisting you just to resist you, but they just maybe haven't had the experience. Maybe they haven't had someone in their life that has had needs. Like for me, I always have my mom's voice in my head where she's like, oh, a 19-year-old must have made this website because the type is so teeny and there's no color contrast. So my mom's been listening to me talk about type since I was like 12 or 13 years old. So it's been a while. And so she uses these terms and I'm like, yes, you have to, if you're not exposed to it, if you don't know there's a better way, if you don't know that you really need to serve people in a different way, then you're not going to, most likely. It's very unlikely you're going to do the right things if you don't know what the right things are. So I think it's about exposure and education, and bringing them along the universal design journey with you and giving them an opportunity to grow and showing them why is this important, and doing the right thing and making it just like a delightful user experience and a humane user experience. Those are the kind of things that I think people just need exposure to.